From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. It seems every week in Washington there's some unprecedented development or change, especially since Donald Trump took office in Washington 2 years ago, and since the Democratic majority has now taken over control of the U.S. House. Nashville Congressman Jim Cooper has been in the middle of all of it. He's our guest today on Inside Politics. Congressman, always happy to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Pat. Always good to be with you.
Is craziness an appropriate term to use, or is it an inappropriate term to use in discussing what's been going on in Washington, now going on close to over 2 years?
Well, it's at least full of drama. Every week is new and different, and I was shocked when the Secretary of Defense felt like he had to resign because of the abrupt change in Syria policy. He was not prepared for that, and the President apparently didn't tell anybody else about it beforehand.
Well, the biggest craziness lately has been the government shutdown, where it cost the American economy $11 billion, says the Congressional Budget Office, $3 billion of which will never be recovered. What are you guys thinking about in Washington when you shut the government down? Now that's becoming more and more frequent.
Well, government shutdowns simply should not happen. This one was extremely unfortunate. The President almost seemed like he wanted it, because at the front end, before the government was shut down, he said he would be proud to claim it. Now, there is an alleged dispute over the wall, but the truth is that both parties have voted for border security in the past. The President seems to be making one type of security the be-all and end-all of the issues, but we should never let government shut down again.
Well, if the government was a private employer, they'd be in trouble with the government for treating their employees the way they've done and holding them hostage for political purposes.
Making people work without pay is outrageous. Shutting down the government of the greatest country in the history of the world is outrageous. Again, it should never happen. And what we're seeing is a Republican split here, because Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Republican from Kentucky, is dead set against these shutdowns. And he finally rose up against Trump and said he's got to end it.
He didn't necessarily come out and say he was against it when this first one, the one that just ended, started. For a while, he stayed kind of quiet about it.
Well, you're right. He laid low. He played possum, but he was mad as the dickens. And he's not going to let the government shut down again.
Another one's coming up potentially on February 15th. What's your prediction? We're going to have another shutdown? We're going to have a national emergency? What's going to happen?
Everybody needs to watch the State of the Union on Tuesday night, because it's amazing. The President likes to surprise people. He doesn't consult with his own advisors. In fact, with his intelligence community, he openly contradicts them. Not just an individual intelligence agency, but all of them put together. It's kind of bizarre, the behavior.
If it is a national emergency, doesn't that get everybody off the hook? Congress can therefore keep government operating. The President can get his wall built using other appropriations that Congress has approved, but either the money wasn't spent or can be spent for something else. Well, wouldn't that be the easiest way to get out of all this mess?
It looks like it would just make it a judicial issue. It would be quickly in the courts, and most people don't think the courts would uphold the emergency, because this, unlike previous presidential emergencies, doesn't seem to be real. It seems to be just a spat with Congress and not a genuine emergency.
You sit on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. That's not necessarily where you'd be looking at changing this, but what does Congress need? If we don't have shutdowns anymore, what do we have?
Well, I have had a bill, and it became law a few years ago, called No Budget, No Pay. If we don't do our work, we don't get paid. And that pretty much guarantees Congress won't shut down the government, because everybody wants to be paid. And it puts us in the same boat with federal workers.
But so many people in Congress, in the Senate and the House, are so independently wealthy that losing their congressional pay is not going to be a major financial, certainly not going to be like it's been for these federal employees who don't get any money.
You know, you're right, but it works in the California legislature, it works in the New York legislature. It worked in 2013 when it became law in America for the federal government. I think you're going to find out that rich people like money even more than anybody else, and they want to be paid.
There's been some talk about some kind of compromise on this, or a third way, and this is the President allows the Army to go down. They're already doing some work down there to put up concertina wire and other things. This might allow him to build the kind of wall he wants down there using some money that's already been appropriated. And then doesn't necessarily have to call a national emergency to do that. But how does everybody back off this impasse we've got over the wall in general, over this appropriation? Because both your leader, Nancy Pelosi, and the President are pretty adamant about wanting their way.
The fundamental misunderstanding is there are border crossings like at Laredo, Texas or San Diego where 15,000, 20,000 trucks go by every day, and that's very important commerce, and we're not doing a good enough job of inspecting each truck. And that's the way a lot of drugs and contraband are getting into this country. So we really need to do a better job of inspecting those trucks. because the long vacant portions of the border, hardly anybody ever crosses there. It's terribly dangerous. It's a desert. You're likely to die out there. The border crossings that should be beefed up are the heavy truck traffic crossings in Texas and California.
In terms of national emergencies, this is a power that Congress gave the president back in 1976, but apparently didn't do a very good job of putting any guidelines on it. Isn't this Congress's fault that you're in the middle of this stuff with these national emergencies? And there's still a lot of them in force, even though the president did call them as long out of office.
Well, as you know, Pat, some 58 emergencies have been called since 1976. Almost all of them have had to do with a foreign situation, not a domestic or border situation. Trump has violated many norms, as you know, and sometimes that's good because you want to shake up things in Washington, but sometimes he's just out of control, and not even his own advisors have any idea what he's doing.
These shutdowns, are they going to become the norm in the future if you don't, or not only that, but these emergencies? I mean, it seems like a president now can do pretty much what he wants to do whenever he wants to do, shut down the government, even cause these situations with emergencies just to get his or her way.
Well, that would be very high-handed and unlike anything we've ever seen before in American history. I certainly hope and pray that doesn't happen. What we need to do is come back to normal, because our founders gave us a complex system of government. It's 3 branches, as you know better than anybody: executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. And we all have to get along in order for the country to function. And right now, as I say, it's not so much a Democrat-Republican split, it's a Republican-on-Republican split, because Mitch McConnell is dead set against any more government shutdowns.
Well, one indication that Mitch McConnell is also unhappy was a resolution that was passed by more than 2/3 of the senators, basically telling the president they did not support his idea of taking troops out of both Syria and Iraq. That's unusual, because the Republicans have been loath to actually publicly disavow the president on this. Is that a sign that there's an overall wider split than that among the president and Republicans at this point?
I'm so glad you spotted that, Pat, because that's one of the most significant things that's happened. Republican foreign policy is very different than what Trump has been talking about. And one or the other side of Republicans have got to budge. The president is the president. He has all sorts of powers, being the #1 elected leader in the country. But it's hard to dislodge these Republican U.S. senators, because there are 53, 54 of them. Many of them are scared to death. They're worried that Trump is going to lead them to defeat in the next election. People like Cory Gardner of Colorado, Susan Collins of Maine, they're scared to death. And Mitch McConnell is their leader, and he wants the president tamed.
Nashville Democratic Congressman Jim Cooper is our guest on Inside Politics. Back to continue our conversation with him after this break.